Institution as a special center for production, technology, service business model?
I think, Sashiji, this is a wonderful idea. In fact, if you look at medical education, every medical college is required to be associated with a hospital where students, after their 4.5 years of formal education, go to the hospital and serve there for 1 year under a senior doctor, and only then they are allowed to register and start practicing, and which unfortunately is not there in technical education right from inception. See, for medical education, it has been there even pre-independence era. Every medical college has an associated hospital, either your own hospital or at least some government hospital with which you are attached. If had technical education when it took off, as and when it took off, had this model of having a production center and also a technology development center and a service center along with a college, I think we would have been in a position to be a better prepared nation in terms of technology as well. Unfortunately, it did not start off. We did not even have internship. At least AICT in the last 3 years has said mandatory internship, and to help those institutions which are in rural areas who cannot have industry institute collaboration so easily, we have created a portal through which internships are provided to students. Now, if someone who has enough area, land into their college premises, and if they have enough built area, if they develop a production center. In fact, every college, especially engineering college, does have a workshop. They have laboratories. They have a computer center. Why can't you use this facility itself for what Sashi Tarunji is asking? You use that for that purpose, because you are not using 24/7 all these facilities. Yeah, you have a practical class for about 3 hours for one batch, another batch 3 hours. So you may be using out of 30, 40 hours per week, maybe some 12 to 15 hours of that particular facility. Remaining 15 hours, it is idling. In the whole evening and night, it is idling. Who has stopped from using it as a production center or a technology center or a service center? I think if someone does that, some poor children who cannot afford to pay the fees probably can get some kind of a employment while studying. It is like earn while learn, and some production if they do, and if that is marketed, and that money which is earned is not taken by the college for profit making but handed over to that student to pay the fees, I think it is a win-win situation.
Thank you, sir. Moving forth with the next question, which has been put forth by Mr. Harish Premi, faculty, Punjab Technical University, Punjab. The question is, the fast pace of privatization of higher education is resulting in the dilution of sanctity of education system. So what steps can be taken in order to restore it?
This is a heavily loaded question, Harish ji. Very difficult to speak out on the part of a regulator, come facilitator, come a government body. If I was outside the domain, I would have been more scathing in my speeches. But in fact, the concern that is raised is absolutely real. We have a population of 1.3 billion population. Our gross enrollment ratio, which I said is around 28%. 1/4 of that is catered to by the technical education. That means out of the entire population who come into the higher education sector, 28% come, remaining 72% are deprived of higher education beyond 11th and 12th. I think that is the fact. How we become more than 40%, 50% is the goal which has been set by the new national education policy. I think it's a challenge. Now, previously when I was speaking, I talked about blended model of online education. Probably many domains where you don't require to formally come to the class, someone can be in the job but still continue the education. This is possible. And in such a case, the amount of fee that one has to pay can be much less. And therefore, even though there is privatization, I think we can keep the fee under check. There are fee regulatory committees in every state. They check for not allowing the institutions to make profit, because we, in our country, very categorically assume that education is meant for philanthropy It is not meant for business. It is not meant for making profit. That's why whether it is trust or society or Section 8 company, whichever is allowed to form an educational institute, first and foremost thing is not for profit. The words not for profit are there. Whereas some of the advanced countries, they are for profit. Secondly, some countries, even highly democratic and highly rich countries, entire education is borne by the government. For example, I will tell you in Europe, Germany has entire education right from school to the PhD education is free. They don't charge any tuition fee. Entire thing is taken care of by the government, whether it is a private or a government university, and that requires a lot of money. And India, with its own resources being limited, probably that is not possible. That's why from 1980s it was opened up for private entities to be in operation in education sector, and today they cover 75%. Government institutions are only 25%. Private institutions are 75%. And in such a scenario, the only model which can work is how we empower more and more children to be doing earn while learn on one side, how many students can be provided scholarship by the government, thereby education is made accessible to the entire sections of the society. I think that's where we stand. And therefore, I am concerned about dilution of the sanctity of the system, what he has raised. But the answer is we have a multifaceted activity which we have to do. There is a responsibility even on two kind of people. One is industry. They have a huge money as CSR fund because their 2% of the profit is to be spent on CSR. Why can't they engage in large number of scholarship for those who cannot afford to pay the fees? Second, those who can afford the fees, why can't they pay higher fee and don't demand education at a lower cost? If my son and daughter can afford to pay higher fee, I must be prepared for that. Like gas subsidy was given up by people, I think subsidy in education also should be given up by the people who have wherewithal. Maybe 20-25% of the population can pay that. Remaining 50% people have difficulty. And the lowest 25% have greater difficulty. How we empower them is the question which we should ask ourselves and find multiple solutions.
Thank you so much, sir. It was indeed knowledgeable. The next question has been put forth by Dr. Harshvardhan Kothari, faculty at Delhi Institute of Advanced Studies, Delhi. The question is, what reorientation is needed for the teachers to prepare for changes post-COVID-19?
Teachers have started changing on their own during the COVID time itself. So post-COVID is much easier because they were not used to these kind of things prior to COVID action, and therefore they were going as business as usual. And suddenly when classes stopped, they were forced to start classes in an online mode. So whatever change, transformation, attitude change is required partly has happened. And AICTE on its part, as I said, different varieties of faculty development programs. They are concentrated on all varieties. Change in attitude. Our program of student induction program where faculty are involved are trained in that. Then examination reforms, we train in that. Research methodology workshop, we training faculty. We have these Atal academies, we are training. So I think teachers are getting prepared. Probably more number of now workshops on how to handle online education is another set of workshops that we need to engage. And if we do that and prepare our teachers, and teachers must be willing to learn. See, सबसे important ये है. Teachers बोलेंगे कि मैं नहीं सीखूंगा, मैंने already PhD कर लिया है. So I think we will not be in a position to do anything. That is, regulator or facilitator can take the horse to a water, but we cannot force it to drink water. It is the same with students and faculty. We have been enabling the entire technical education system, whether students or faculty. Please make use of all this opportunity that we are giving. And with no cost. See, we are not asking for any money for this. We are providing on our own. Please make use of that. And I'm sure if that attitude is developed, post-COVID-19 era is going to be a bright era for India.
Indeed true, sir. Indeed true. And obviously, as it is said, change is the only constant thing that we can ever have. So the next question is by Dr. Dilip Nandkyolyar of faculty from Commonwealth University. The question is Gurukul pedagogy versus systems-driven pedagogy. Your kind view, sir.
Yeah, I think there is nothing like versus. In my opinion, Gurukul pedagogy and systems driven pedagogy are one and the same. It is only the nature of system, how we look at it, how we view it may be different. Even today, in the modern era, some of the terminologies which I also used and many Western world educational institutions and educationists use are experiential learning, project based learning. We say we have what is known as internships. We have theory and practice should go hand in hand. Skill should be imparted. I think all of this vocabulary and the language which is there in the systems driven pedagogy today is nothing but the Gurukul pedagogy. You go to the pedagogy of Gurukul, a student used to leave his home, stay in the Guru's house, and not only theory part of it was taught, and of course, unfortunately or fortunately, whatever, there were no buildings. They were all below the tree getting this education in an open atmosphere, fresh air, with nice surroundings, the nature, and those theory things, whatever were taught, were asked to be experimented. And even tasks as menial as getting firewood from the forest to fetching of water from the river or the well nearby is required to teach something or the other. How difficult it is to cut a tree and get the wood for firewood. How difficult it is to carry water. And women in India in villages carry for 10 kilometers. Every boy also should go and fetch that water, not just the mothers. And that is where we start learning. And therefore, whether in the curriculum it is gardening, agriculture, doing carpentry, doing some kind of workshop activities, not necessarily in only engineering, in management, in arts, commerce, science, I think that is important. And that is Gurukul pedagogy, and which is nothing but systems-driven pedagogy. There is nothing versus. It's only your, spectacles or the glasses that you wear, you look it differently in different colors.
Thank you, sir. You did correct. You just showed the very correct picture. So the next question is a highly demanded one. So it has been raised by various faculty members of different universities and higher educational institutions. So the question is, in the post-COVID period, what will be the best process so as to evaluate the students' performance?
I think I have already talked about examination reforms. I may have to again reiterate some of that. What we call it as Bloom's taxonomy, where learning is evaluated not based on memory. That means rote learning, which can be at most 25 to 30%. Rest of that is understanding of the subject, application, synthesis, analytical and critical ability, innovation, and creativity. I think question papers are required to be based on all these facets. And if you are able to do that, which was required only also Esther era, we unfortunately did not do it. And now, post-COVID era at least, since we were forced to undertake some of these things, why can't we start making use of them more elaborately and gradually move into the domain which I talked about? The holistic exercise is necessary. And I talked about only those 7-8 different varieties of evaluation as far as curriculum is concerned. What we used to consider as extracurricular, gradually we have started calling it as co-curricular. How co-curricular also becomes curricular is important. For example, sports. Every individual must get into some kind of a sport. We must evaluate, add some marks of that into the university transcript. In terms of yoga, in terms of his skills, whether they are physical skills or various types of soft skills or life skills, values, ethics, I think we must be graded for all of that. If we do that, we get a 360-degree evaluation of a personality, and any industry which wants to recruit or any person who wants to employ them will understand a person much better, and that is the student's overall performance evaluation.
Thank you, sir. Moving forward to the next question by Ms. Manisha Patwari, faculty at Geeta Ratan International Business School. The question is, how should institutions function in the post-COVID crisis period?
तो मैंने बार बार बताया कि there are three types of things which are possible. One of them is entire online. This is one model. Or entirely we have face-to-face mode of education. And between the two, which I said often as blended, we can have blend of a different variety that we have to open up. We must come together. As human beings, being social animals, we enjoy coming together, whether it is birthday parties, marriage parties, social functions, religious functions, Independence Day, Republic Day, or Onam, or Lori, whatever it is, we want to come together and enjoy. And if you stop all of that, we will not remain as human beings, and probably there will be huge psychological problems which will emerge. And therefore, coming together is important. But while coming together is important, if we ignore the pandemic and the COVID crisis, and beyond COVID, I don't know how long it is going to sustain, 3 months, 6 months, 1 year. So the norm of social distancing, wearing masks, using sanitizers, and not coming in large numbers together is going to be there. Therefore, the different models can emerge. 1/3 students will come every day by rotation, different 1/3 students. Thereby, social distancing is maintained, examinations can be conducted for all students, and we can still have sports, music, dance, drama, painting, all of that. I think that is the way forward for the educational institutions.
Thank you, sir. So the next question is by Ms. Monica Saini, faculty. The question is, do you feel that quality of our technical education is lower than that of other nations or other countries?
No, I can't believe this kind of a change. Certainly, it is not the best. I think we should be, true to ourselves, and we are not bad. If you observe, some of the best companies of the world, take it Apple, Microsoft, Google, and also NASA and many other such organizations, it is all either headed by Indian students, or there are a huge number of them being employed there. And why did it happen? All the education was from here. So it is not as bad as we often project ourselves, but we are not certainly the best of the lot. So we need to certainly improve. Our improvement is necessary, but we are not low. And this is also proved from what is known as Stanford study, which MHRD and AICT through TechWhip we had conducted, that 3 countries, China, Russia, and India, were compared based on the US, that is Stanford being in US. The basis was US, and along with that, Russia, China, and India were studied. And the preliminary investigation and report shows that although while entering the technical education system, our students are not as well prepared as all other 3 countries, but by the time they graduate, they come up very close to these countries. That itself shows that our quality is not bad.
Thank you, sir. So the next question again has been asked by various faculty members of different higher educational institutions and different universities. The question is, will digital mode of education facilitate holistic development of students?
I think this is a challenge. It is much difficult in terms of digital mode of education. That's why I all the time has been saying that we must have face-to-face mode, coming together, discussions, playing, dance, drama. This interaction is very, very lively, and which actually trains the mind. And that's why entirely digital mode of education will not facilitate holistic development.
Thank you, sir. So the next question has been asked by Dr. Praveen Dubey, faculty at DIT University. The question is, with least or with no internet connectivity, or with electricity problems, or with higher cost of hardware at remote locations, then how can e-learning be possible?
There are a variety of possibilities. First and foremost, along with Swayam, there are 32 direct-to-home channels called as Swayam Prabha channels. And all the content that is delivered through Swayam is also available in the medium of television. That means direct to home. What you need is an antenna costing 2000 rupees, one time investment. Of course, you require electricity. Without electricity, TV will not work. But if you have that, you can have all the education that I'm talking about at your home. And if a person or a particular family does not have, I think what is most important is sharing. And we found that in COVID-19 time that people helped each other. No one starved to death. There were hundreds and thousands of people in every village, town, cities who lost their jobs, but either government fed them or the people fed them. And similarly, why can't we feed internet to someone who is deprived in our locality? I think I'm posing a simple question. Why can't I give my mobile device, which I have used earlier and is lying idle in my home, a smartphone? Most of the people from middle class, upper middle class families, every 6 months we buy a new mobile phone. Yes or no? I think the answer is loud yes. And there are 5 to 6 such sets available in every home. Why can't we give them as it is if they are working? If they are not, spend some 4 5 thousand rupees, fix the problem, and hand over as donation to the library, which in turn goes to those students. I think smart devices. Then government can give data which is free for some of the poorer children, and some of the companies under CSR can give free data for some of the students. I think there are possibilities. And then these IT companies, NASCOM, told us that every year more than 500,000 computers are changed. New computers are bought by them. Why can't they give to every village one computer, and in a common place, whether it is a temple or whether it is a marriage hall, whether it is a common some function hall, where we keep it and bring students, and they will learn both two-way communication through internet being made available there. So I think there are problems, but there are solutions as well.
Thank you, sir. So moving forward to our next question, which has been put forth by Dr. Shanmuga Sundaram Vishwanatham, faculty VTU. The question is, will AICTE publish any new updated handbook after COVID-19?
No, we publish our handbook annually once, and that is during the time of approval process. So the handbook for 2021 is already published, and 21-22 will certainly come before December. So that means we are already now entering into July. So July to December is not even 4 5 months. Post COVID starting will be somewhere around August September. So I will say that yes, but actually it is for 21-22.
Thank you, sir. So our next question is from Mr. Deepak Batra, research scholar, Command University. The question is, what is the future of empirical research in the post-COVID world?
I think there is a scope for empirical research as well as all variety of research, either in the pre-COVID, COVID, and post-COVID era. There is a drug discovery hackathon which is going to be launched in just next 2 days by the Prime Minister's office and the Department of Science and Technology, CSIR, and AICTE. And in this, lot of research on the COVID-19 itself is going to be collected, that data. And lot of empirical data is going to be used for research purposes for discovering new drugs, including COVID-19 drugs. So there is always a value for this, but we cannot depend only on empirical research. But sometimes some of the research has to be actually then implemented into practice. Those drugs which are developed and discovered are to be first injected into some of the animals like rat or rabbit or monkey, and then it comes to human testing. So I think I gave an example of biological field or a drug field, which is important today. But same thing is applied for even engineering research. There can be empirical research; it will not stop. But we should not depend only on empirical research, but move ahead in the value chain.
Thank you so much, sir. Moving forward, the question is from Mr. Subodh Pandey, Edupreneur, KPMG. The question is, why are we so dependent on other countries for technology?
I think there was already a gap in terms of technology. If you look at history, we were one up long ago till about 12th, 13th century, and we started slipping. And by the time we got independence, we were very down in terms of new technologies and science and research. And gradually we are picking up. We have still not reached the same level as some of the developed countries, and therefore we have been dependent on that. But the very call given by the Honorary Prime Minister that Atmanirbhar Bharat, we started with Make in India, Digital India, Smart India, and now when we say Atmanirbhar Bharat, the emphasis is going to be of developing technology in-house. At least all those technologies which we are capable of. In fact, if you look at some of the technologies, they are prepared here, they are done by foreign companies at the cost of our talent, and then they sell it back to us. So if you really want to develop, I think we have shown the way, whether it is in ISRO's satellite launch vehicles, liquid propulsion engines, and which country in the world has launched 103 satellites in one go? No other country other than India. So I think that is one. In terms of nuclear science also, we have a variety of new things which we have done. In terms of DRDO, we have done. I think we have the capability, we have to have the will and the confidence, and if you do that, we can be successful. So there is no necessity of dependent on foreign technology, but just because we want to be Swadeshi and we want to develop, if something takes time, there is nothing wrong in taking some of the technologies and using them.
Thank you, sir. So the next question is again a highly demanded one, which has been raised by various faculty members of different universities. The question they seek to ask is, how employability enhancing modules can be integrated with the work or study from home concept in the backdrop of post-COVID pandemic?
I think employability requires a lot of hands-on experience, hands-on solving of the problems, which I already narrated, and therefore internship, which is made mandatory, is important. And as long as this COVID pandemic continues, and therefore social distancing is required to be maintained, and therefore companies will not allow us to get into the company premises, even though they start themselves, I think we may have to depend on online internships for some time, but we must be able to go to the industry and watch what is happening there and improve the processes over there. And that is what improves the employment.
Thank you, sir. Moving forward, the next question has been put forth by Dr. V.R. Nedunchezian from Kumar Guru College of Technology. The question he seeks to raise is, the present batch is highly worried about their coming future. So please provide some guidance, sir.
I think my first advice to all these worried students is don't worry. It's very easy to say, but difficult to practice. I agree, even if I was in their situation today, I would be in confusion. And same is happening with our young students. Whether exam will be held or not, whether they will get job or not, whether internship is available or not, what will happen to the next session. So all these doubts are in the minds of students. But please understand that this pandemic, which has come now, had come 100 years ago, and large number of deaths were there even at that point in time when the population was much less. And so, compared to that, in terms of advancement, in terms of medical science, we have been far better care is possible, and therefore, this phase will also pass someday. It may take a couple of months more. So, in life, which is almost 80, 90, 100 years for the human being, 1 year loss is not a loss. Many people lose it because of a variety of reasons. I should tell you that I have lost 1 year. Not because I failed in the examination, but because our university results came so late during that time that for my post-graduation I had to wait for full 6 months. And our education in engineering was 5 years, unlike 4 years now. So I have lost 1.5 years. But in life I could make it up. So I think don't worry, be confident, keep studying, be a lifelong learner, and I'm sure you will overcome all that comes your way and you will be a successful individual.
Thank you so much for motivating us, sir. Moving forward to the next question, which has been raised by Mr. Sanjay Devkishan Taneja, faculty, Amity University, Lucknow. The question he seeks to raise is, how much impact will MOOCs have on regular teaching patterns?
I think there is not much of an impact. See, just because MOOCs is there and 20% or tomorrow 40% is allowed, I'm asking a counter question. Why can't professors in ordinary affiliated colleges or small private or government colleges also create MOOCs courses? No one has stopped. I think that is the strength which we have to use. So you should not be afraid. And secondly, although there are MOOCs courses which students can take on the MOOCs platform, whatever they don't understand or whatever challenging problems are there in your vicinity, in your neighborhood, why can't faculty think aloud, go out of the box, do innovation, and make the class more interesting in the form of blended learning mode? I think, therefore, the impact is those who do not want to learn from what is happening across the globe, and if you are not ready to learn, you are going to be affected. But otherwise, those who are willing to change, those who are willing to have that attitude of change, I think they will be as successful as any one of the best faculty in the best possible institute in the country.
Thank you, sir. So moving forward to our last question of this session, which has been put forward by Mr. Oda, Administrative Staff, Punjab Group of Institutes. He seeks to ask, don't you feel that it is the time to introduce 100% practical-oriented programs to produce handyman who can perform all types of tasks like plumbing, electrician, etc. in societies?
I think that is what is already in a way happening, because if you look at the migration of the labor which happened in this last 3 months, initially they were not allowed. There was a lot of resistance. Some of them walked. Later, trains were started. People went to their respective places. They all had some kind of a skill or the other when they were in the larger cities. When they go to a village, probably that skill set which they had learned or were practicing may not be useful there. And therefore, how a related skill sets can be developed. In fact, one of the doctors was saying that heart operation is nothing but plumbing. In plumbing, you have all variety of pipes being connected, joints. You cut them and again reconnect them. You have a elbow, you have a T, and in heart operation also you have different arteries, veins cut, and you pick them up from some other part of the body and then again join them. I think therefore the two skill sets are so different, and one is so high end and one is so low end in our opinion, but both have some commonalities. I'm giving extreme example, may not be the right one, but I just thought of when the plumbing word was used, but probably something else. Plumbers can also make use of for creating some other infrastructure related activity. They may learn electrician's job. So certainly there is a scope for multifaceted, multi-skilled kind of an ITI program where people learn 2 to 3 skills, and if there is a downturn in one of the skills, they can get into the other skill and start continuing to earn livelihood. I think that's very, very good idea. But my point is, even engineers or doctors or lawyers or management experts, in our classes, we must have at least 1 or 2 skill sets that we must learn. Only then, there are 2 things. Sometimes we are so dependent at a house, suddenly if the fuse goes off, an electrical engineer calling an electrician to repair it or fix it is the saddest story I can imagine of. And therefore, some skill sets we must earn ourselves, and we will also in the process understand the labor involved behind that, the kind of talent that is involved in doing that. And like, for example, an automobile engineer is asked to fix a non-working engine, he will struggle and sweat, but he will not do it. And then he will understand the importance of a mechanic who just does it in 1 hour. But if he charges 500 rupees, I am willing to pay. That is the philosophy that you will develop. Otherwise, you will crib about paying 500 rupees. I think dignity of labor is also inculcated if you start practicing yourself.
True, sir. Indeed true. Thank you so much, sir. We are truly grateful to you for enlightening all of us with your wisdom and knowledge. Thank you, sir, once again. And with this, ladies and gentlemen, we have now come to an end to today's session. Indeed, I feel blessed to hear Professor Dr. Anil D. Sahasrabudhe on the topic where every attendee must have got immense information and knowledge. I once again extend my sincere reverence on behalf of Geeta Ratan International Business School, Rohini, to you, sir, for agreeing to spend your precious time with us this lovely evening. Thank you so much, sir, once again.
Thank you, Kavya. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I'm also very thankful to all the attendees for putting up through your provoking questions in the episode to make the show even more vibrant. Thank you all of you for joining us here today. Thank you all once again for your precious time being with us today. Thank you so much, everyone. Good night, everyone. Take care. Please take care of yourself and your families. Stay home and stay safe. Thank you.